Hi everybody, we are here now with our guest speaker for this evening, John Hamer from Beaux, who is going to speak to us about the e-scooters and the electric bikes that you may have seen around town, painted a very fetching shade of a peachy pinky orange. I'm sure everyone has a different color that they would use to describe it. But John, I'll let you introduce yourself, your role in Beaux, and tell us what's going on.
Super, thank you very much. Yeah, so I think we call it coral, the colour. But yes, I'm a city success manager here at Beaux. So I work very closely with local city stakeholders in Cambridge and Peterborough, and sort of manage the sort of operational day to day in the two cities. So that's my role and where I fit in. I joined in I think sort of mid December time, so relatively new to the company. So I will just share my screen and let me know if you can see that. Hopefully no issues. Super. So essentially what I'd like to do today is just talk everyone through a bit of an introduction to Beaux, the company, a bit of an explanation of sort of how we operate in Cambridge and Peterborough, and then a bit of content on our sort of latest developments in terms of sort of safety, parking and sort of operational points like that. Cambridge is quite an interesting city, obviously, because we have both e-scooters and e-bikes, which we don't have in all of our cities. So that's is quite a good case study for Beaux. But essentially, at a high level, the company's mission is to create cities made for living. We believe that, you know, essentially the way we get around cities is not the way it should be, and micromobility, i.e. sort of e-scooters and e-bikes, is a way to transform that. So what I do firstly is just explain the sort of story of Beaux as a company globally. So micromobility is a relatively new industry. It started really sort of in the last couple of years. So we were founded in 2018 in Sweden. Since then, we've gained about 6 million users. We're operating in about 50 cities across 10 different countries. And we're actually, since I think last year, we've been operating a climate neutral, carbon neutral service in terms of our sort of overall emissions, which is really, really positive. And we're now at the point where we've got about 1,000 employees across the company, so it's growing really, really fast. In the UK, slightly different. So we've got a lot of activity focused in the Midlands in terms of sort of cities such as Birmingham, Coventry, sort of Wolverhampton around there, and of course Cambridge and Peterborough as well to the east, and Oxford and sort of Northampton in the more central area. We've also got operations in places like Liverpool and Bristol and Bath as well in the southwest, and 2 in the Solent, Southampton and Portsmouth. So we're across the UK at the moment, and we've got 18 exclusive licenses to operate in those different places. So since we launched in the UK in September last year, we've had about 2 million trips so far. We've travelled over 4.6 million kilometres, which is, I think, the same distance as to and from the Earth, and then to the Moon and back. We've spent a lot of time engaging with different groups. So about 350 hours we spent engaging with equalities groups across the UK. And we've also spent a lot of money on physical parking infrastructure. So we've got about 100 racks in different cities. And the sort of culmination of all of this is we think we've avoided about 600,000 car trips since launch, based on our figures and our research. So that's the sort of story of the UK. We're currently at about 7,000 scooters and I think roughly 300 or 400 e-bikes, which is a number that grows all the time. So I've got a couple of testimonials here just to explain sort of a couple of our key council stakeholders, including Mehmet, who's from the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. So he said he'd been really impressed with our sort of hyper-local approach. We work very closely with cities and sort of design the service around the city. And we take a lot of feedback from both sort of local groups and stakeholders and residents, and also the local authorities in terms of how we design the service and manage things like parking. So we've had really good feedback so far in the UK, and hopefully that will continue. So that's the sort of story of where we are in the UK and globally as a company. Obviously, it's been a very, very fast expansion. And for Cambridge specifically, this actually image is a heat map of our sort of utilisation. So our sort of key routes in Cambridge. You can see that's in our our sort of hourglass shaped operating area, which we've recently expanded. But essentially, in all of our cities, this is a sort of blueprint for how we operate. But this is the sort of story of Cambridge. We start quite small, quite gradually, with a sort of relatively small operating area and a small sort of fleet size. I think it was about sort of 50, 75 scooters in Cambridge at the outset in October. We then sort of track how the utilisation goes and sort of where sort of different areas might be to expand to. So in Cambridge, we sort of expanded to the south into the sort of Trumpington area, and then also in January we then expanded sort of to the north to cover sort of Milton and around sort of Girton College. Beyond that, obviously, is since we've come out of some of the lockdown restrictions, the utilisation has really grown, and we've seen lots of people using our e-bikes and scooters. So we've actually expanded last week to an area which is about 37 square kilometres, as you can see here. So out to sort of Cherry Hinton in the southeast, and also covering the sort of university area in the west of the city, and then north up to sort of cover Histon and around sort of Impington area. So that's obviously where we are right now. That'll remain for sort of the next sort of period, and then after that we'll look at other places where we can expand to, because I think there's still some good opportunities for other sort of residential areas that we could reach in the Cambridge area. For Peterborough, it's a sort of similar story. You can see some of the icons with the sort of parking hubs on this image. So we cover a sort of a swan-shaped almost sort of image. Currently don't cover Neen Park, but we cover the sort of main area of the city centre. And for Peterborough, it is actually e-bikes only. It's a dedicated e-bike market, so there are no scooters in Peterborough, but we have a fleet of e-bikes. And on the e-bikes themselves, obviously, this is probably of most interest to Camcycle. So we have about sort of between 80 and 100 now in Cambridge, and 80 and 100, I think, in Peterborough. We launched these in January with a fleet of 20, so we've increased that quite a bit in percentage terms since then. And obviously, those have been really popular, and that's a nice shot of one of them outside. I think that's King's College in Cambridge. So that's been a real success story, and they work in a very similar way to the e-scooters. So you operate them through the app. They're controlled by the geofencing in a similar way. Pricing is very similar, and it's a very similar sort of user interface. So I thought I'd then touch a little bit on our sort of operations and how we work in terms of sort of geofencing and parking, stuff like that. Go into a bit more of a deep dive on that. So our current model scooter in Cambridge is the V3X. So a bit of detail on that. So this is our sort of been our dedicated scooter for about a year now. We're actually currently rolling out the next generation, but currently this is what we use in Cambridge. It has around a 60-mile range. We estimate that the lifespan can be up to 5 years if looked after, which obviously is a really big reduction on the sort of the earlier models that I think many micromobility operators were sort of using right at the outset. In terms of maximum speed, they can go up to 15.5 miles an hour, which is defined by the Department for Transport. Currently in Cambridge, they run at 12.5 miles an hour, which is something that's agreed between Beaux and the City Council. They use swappable batteries, so rather than taking the whole e-scooter to the warehouse for charging, we actually just swap the battery out and install the fresh one. It's obviously much more environmentally friendly, and we use e-vans and cargo bikes to do that. As well as that, they use a sort of 4G connection to connect between your phone and the scooter itself, which enables unlocking and locking and sort of control through the app. And we use GPS as well, which can enable us to control where they go and sort of parking, things like that. You can see on this image on the bottom right that these ones actually have license plates on, which is something that we've added in the UK as a sort of innovation to enable people to report misuse on the scooters. And just on the V4, which is sort of an iteration rather than a revolution, but these we've rolled out in a couple of cities in the UK so far, including Portsmouth. But we don't have them as yet in Cambridge, but they will be coming at some point. The real innovation here is there's sort of a couple of things like the turning indicators, so you can actually indicate using a switch which way you're turning to vehicles, which obviously is much safer. Similar sort of, use swappable batteries and similar sort of beacons and interfaces, but they also have antimicrobial handlebars to prevent COVID spreading on surfaces, which we've actually retrofitted to the V3s as well, and the license plates as well, and I think a slightly better GPS, which is obviously enables sort of better management of parking. So in terms of our operations themselves, and this applies for both e-bikes and e-scooters, we have different zones that we can set up to control where users can go. So we can set up, these obviously depend on the market to some extent. So Cambridge is a mandatory parking zone market. So we use mandatory parking zones which define exactly where people have to leave their scooters or bikes, as opposed to incentivized parking zones where we give people I think a discount if they park in those areas, and otherwise it's sort of free floating. But yeah, as I say, in Cambridge we use mandatory parking zones. We also have no parking zones where you can't park at all in some markets, and we can set up slow speed zones, such as in sort of areas where there's high footfall and we don't want people to be racing through, and also no riding zones where you have sort of fully pedestrianised areas, and places like sort of parks where you might not want people to go. So that's something we can control very easily, and we work very closely with the local authority to set that up. In terms of physical infrastructure, we don't have a huge amount of physical infrastructure in Cambridge at the moment, but it is something that we're looking at installing in the sort of longer term roadmap. We see it in other markets that parking infrastructure such as racks has a really positive effect on user behaviour. Generally speaking, it's been pretty good in Cambridge, but this is obviously something we're looking at longer term to really encourage people to park considerately. And we have a number of different options for that. So I've got a couple of examples here. So in Portsmouth, image on the far left is our sort of standard parking rack, which is that one's near the Sea Life Museum in Portsmouth. We also have parking bays that can go in car parking spaces, which we're looking to bring to the UK as well, obviously longer term. And also we have the painted parking bay. So that's actually an image from Oxford, where we literally paint a sort of parking bay on the ground to indicate where people park. Again, this is something that Voy covers all the cost of, and we're working to bring those out in different cities at the moment. In terms of pricing, we have it's different pricing models. So we have a sort of pay-as-you-go model, which is £1 to unlock and then 20p thereafter per minute. We also offer subscription passes. So we have a day pass at £5 and a monthly pass at £40, which offer unlimited 40-minute rides. And we have a number of discount schemes as well. So actually they've got a slide on that which explains those in a bit more detail. So we have three main discount schemes. We have the Voy for Heroes scheme, which during the current lockdown is 100% off the Voy pass, so essentially a free access. I think that's going to end in I think probably May or June when the restrictions end. We have Voy for All, which is a 75% discount for anyone that is from a low income group with an HGT certificate. And we offer a 20% student discount as well, which also applies to staff of higher educational institutes. So that sort of covers how we operate at a sort of relatively high level. And then I will go into a few of the latest sort of developments and processes that we're introducing in UK markets in response to sort of learnings from the first few months. One of the points I wanted to call out was around modal shift, because I think that there might obviously be some interest in that. That's a hot topic in micromobility at the moment in terms of who is using scooters and why, and are they replacing trips that they might otherwise have taken with other methods. So we've obviously got relatively limited data on this so far, because we've only been operating for a period of months in the UK. But we performed an in-app survey in the UK in March and April this year, which indicated that over 20% of trips were replacing a car journey in the UK amongst our users. Notably, that's actually quite a bit higher than in some other countries in Europe. And we're looking at the moment to spend a bit more time on the data and perform sort of different studies and more in-depth studies to really get to the nub of that one. But that's the sort of headline figure that we can report at the moment, which is really positive and suggests that already, even though they're relatively new, people are actually using scooters to replace car journeys. We also have a number of partners on the right-hand side, which just indicates some of the people that we're working with at the moment to understand sort of modal shift and also partner with integration with transport networks. So a couple of items to talk through in terms of safety initiatives. So we have a local operations team in every city who work to correct scooters which have been parked incorrectly or tilted, which is essentially when they've fallen over. Similar to that, we have a tilt detection dashboard, which means that we're notified if a scooter has actually fallen over. The scooters themselves have an accelerometer in, which tells us when they have when they've fallen over. As part of the DFT regulations for any scooter user, they have to have a full or provisional driving license and be over the age of 18. So we have full driving license verification for all of our users, which also requires a selfie to be approved to make sure that they are the person using the scooter. Technology-wise, we have very accurate GPS, so we can create the geofencing zones to stop people going to the wrong places. We use a lot of reporting, which we share with cities. We have very, very rich data which we generate, and we share that with both the police and also the local authorities. And finally, one additional point is we've recently rolled out a new reporting solution, which essentially it's called Report a Scooter, and essentially it's a sort of digital website which takes you through a series of different questions and triages your request in terms of if you have an issue with a scooter, whether you're a rider or a non-rider. And these are then sort of categorized and sent straight through to our operations team. So if there are issues that are reported with our scooters, they are sent right through to our team, and we can deal with those very quickly. One other thing which I'd like to just double click on in a bit more detail is something that we have a suite of measures called intelligent parking, and one of these is our N-Ride photo system. So now any user that rides will be faced with these app screens, and then they will be forced essentially to take a photo of their parking, which someone in the Voy team will then verify whether they've parked considerately or whether they parked within a zone or not. And then we take action with users and to educate them, and also issue strikes if they haven't parked correctly. And we can also issue fines as well. And then from May this year, obviously with the COVID restrictions, we've been unable to run our safety events, which we like to run to educate people about the scooters and sort of give out helmets. So from the end of May, we're looking to restart these in the UK. Those are going to be monthly on Saturdays in our cities, generally speaking, where people can come, turn up, learn about the scooters, learn about how to use the app and how to ride safely. And also they will receive a free helmet for turning up. Anyone that buys a monthly pass right now can also claim a free helmet from us. I think there's a small charge for postage and packaging, but that's it. So I think from my perspective, that is probably it in terms of presentation content. I thought there might be a couple of questions in terms of how we operate, which I could take. So I think I will pause there and stop sharing.
Thank you, John. That was great, and I think a very good summary to kick us off. And I do not doubt for a minute that we're going to have some questions. Facebook's a little bit behind our chat here, so we'll just give that a little bit of time for those questions to start coming through. I guess I would start with an observation. I was actually surprised to see that 20% of journeys are actually replacing car journeys. And is that for the scooters? Is that for the e-bikes? Is that combined? And I know you said there needs to be some more research into that, but I guess that looks quite positive. Do you have anything else you can say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and I think it's as I say, it's a very hot topic within micromobility in terms of sort of how people are using them. I think that probably is a blended rate for e-bikes and e-scooters, because that was a survey that was taken, I think, from all of our users. And people that responded between March and April, and obviously we've been running the e-bikes since January. So I think there probably is some e-bike data in there. But I think generally speaking, it's one of those things. Obviously, that's a great headline rate, but what we really need to do is spend a bit more time to understand the detail behind that, and also see how that sort of pattern evolves. Because I think at the moment, because of the sort of lockdown restrictions, our fleet sizes are not sort of enormous in every city. And obviously the sort of vision of micromobility, and I think the patterns of usage that we've seen in other cities in Europe, is that you need a certain level of sort of availability of scooters and e-bikes, to actually encourage people to use them and to replace other modes of transport. So unless you have a sort of really, really good availability, you have a sort of a period of sort of 2 or 3 minutes walking to your nearest vehicle, people tend to sort of stick with their existing modes of transport. So I think what will be interesting is to see how that rate of modal shift develops in the coming months, and obviously in the summer we're expecting really, really good utilisation. And people may start returning to workplaces as well, which also may encourage people to use them to commute. So I think it's a sort of watch this space, really. I think that we will hopefully get some really rich insights sort of towards the end of this year. Roxanne, I think you might be muted actually. Could just remove it, I think.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks. I think that it will be interesting to see if we're only getting 20% replacement of car journeys, then what are those other journeys? Are they new journeys that weren't being made, walking, cycling, buses? And if they are replacing those sustainable modes, do we need to have a little bit of a thing? It's not necessarily bad, but it could also provide interesting insights about issues that we have in other areas. I've started to hear from people that they use the scooters or the e-bikes to travel to Cambridge station because they don't feel safe to lock their bikes there. So there's actually they're replacing cycling journeys, but it's because of a other issue that perhaps needs to be overcome. So it'd be intriguing to see what comes out of that data.
Absolutely. I think it's the integration with other sort of transport networks is a really interesting one. Obviously, as I showed in the slide earlier, we're working with a couple of sort of mobility providers, and I know we've done some work in Switzerland with the Swiss rail operator SBB in terms of sort of integration with those transport networks. I think the thing about scooters and e-bikes, particularly in a sort of shared scheme, is that you wouldn't necessarily use them in every case for sort of your entire journey. Scooters particularly lend themselves really well to sort of journeys of sort of between 1 and 2 or 3 miles. But it's kind of, are you using that to get to the station to then continue your journey? And actually, I think that's where they can work really well, is if you sort of integrate as either first or last mile transport, as well as sort of actual, dedicated journeys. So I think the purpose of the DFT trial really is to sort of gain those insights and see what the future of how micromobility can be used in the UK going forward.
Yeah. So we have a question about how many staff cover Cambridge, and actually then also how many staff cover Peterborough.
Good question. So I mean, at a sort of city local level, it sort of depends. I think obviously we have a number of people that are working in our head office in London, who obviously work indirectly with each city. So I'm not actually based in Cambridge, but obviously I'm sort of dedicated resource for Cambridge. So I guess it sort of depends whether you count those kind of people. We have a number of different teams. We have obviously warehouse operatives who work, and sort of mechanics to manage our operations there. And in Cambridge, I think we have a shared warehouse for Peterborough and Cambridge. And then we have a team of ambassadors when we launch in each city who work on the ground to sort of interact with users and with riders and members of the public and sort of report misuse. And then we have a team of people who sort of look after scooters when they go missing. So I think it's difficult to put an exact number on it for sort of an individual city, but I think we look at creating sort of numbers in the tens of jobs for each city. Again, depending on how you sort of define who's associated to a city, but we definitely hire locally, and we have a lot of the team who are based in Cambridge and Peterborough and work sort of day to day. And I've spent time at the Cambridge warehouse, and yeah, we have a really strong local team there.
So actually, a bit more on the 20% modal shift, and that's probably the area that we're most interested in, I would imagine. But just to be more specific about, was that in Cambridge or was that across Cambridge and Peterborough? That you saw?
So that the 20% statistic is actually UK wide. Okay. So again, we don't have e-bikes in all markets, but I think that probably does include that figure. But yeah, that's a UK figure. At the moment, I don't think we have a figure for Cambridge. I think that is something we're working on. As I say, we've only been operating in the UK for sort of about sort of 6-8 months, so depending on the market. So we just don't have a full sort of set of data yet. But yeah, that's a UK figure that we reported between March and April this year.
I think that would be very interesting to compare Cambridge without existing high rates of active travel to other cities as well. And I think could we even find a way to track in other cities in particular, if people start replacing car journeys, then do they actually increase their active travel beyond that? Or I think would be quite interesting. Anyway, okay. So we've got a question. Only licensed e-scooters should be used in the UK at the moment. So at the moment, let's be very clear. I'll let you say what the rules are at the moment, John, about what scooters are allowed. But anecdotally, there are unlicensed usage all over. I can vouch for that. I've seen it a lot. And I think a lot of people think that these scooters are legal. Do you have any views on how that should be dealt with, if at all? So if you could start by saying, what's the legal situation on scooters and what do we do about illegal scooters?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question, and probably a distinction I should have made right at the beginning. So essentially, at the moment, Voy is operating under the Department for Transport enabled trial, which is, i.e. to say, a rental shared e-scooter scheme. And obviously, in each of our cities, we have a contract with the local authority, and we are licensed to operate rental scooters and e-bikes in those places. There is obviously, as has been mentioned, I'm sure people are well aware, private e-scooters can be purchased from sort of retail stores in the UK. They are currently illegal to use on public land, so they're legal to use on private land. But they cannot be used on the public highway at the moment. Obviously, our scooters are very visible, and they're coral coloured, and everyone is I think most people are sort of familiar with those. But obviously, a lot of people that are not very sort of well informed about the micromobility industry. Obviously, it's very new. You've got to be sort of quite an enthusiast to read out the detail. Some people might not be aware that actually our scooters are legal at the moment, and the private ones are not legal for use on the public road. So I think that's a question we get a lot. And again, it's something that Voy works very closely with the Department for Transport in terms of sort of future legislation and how the trials are going. And I think it's one of those things where obviously the industry and the sort of products have come about very, very quickly. And they've been able to purchase, sort of come to market very quickly. And I think regulation, generally speaking, moves sort of quite slowly and is quite a sort of considered process. And it's quite hard to sort of regulate against every sort of new innovation that appears. Just to say that the trial for the rental e-scooters was actually accelerated by the government due to the COVID crisis last year. So they said they weren't actually planning to do the trial as soon as they did. But it was in response to COVID. They said we need to find a way of people getting around that is socially distanced and is safer and sort of more individual in that sense. So that was the sort of reaction to COVID. So I think it's a really good distinction to make. And obviously we're aware of the sort of challenges with people using private e-scooters, and I think it particularly also the local councils and law enforcement are very well aware of that as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well that Camcycle recently published our micromobility policy, and that through the stakeholder group about micromobility, which includes Voy and various other stakeholders, including the council, our policy was passed up to the DFT. So for those volunteers and members who've contributed to the development of Camcycle's micromobility policy, well done. That is probably on someone's desk, and I do hope that it is helping to influence that national policy. But it does very much feel like the policy is catching up to the technology, and I guess for the police, essentially policing the illegal use of scooters just fits somewhere in those policing priorities, and probably not close to the top at the moment. And I think there's also the distinction, I think, of the illegal scooters that are going a safe speed, and then the illegal scooters that are going at a much faster speed than the 15.5 miles. that they should be limited to. So there's being illegal and there's the extra level, isn't there? I think then the next question from Martin is, could you clarify if this is a purely commercial operation to which Voy has an exclusive arrangement with the council, or whether this is a licensing arrangement where the provision is subsidised by the council?
Good question. So in Cambridge, it is. I don't think we receive any subsidy from CPCA to operate the e-scooters.
Yeah. Okay. Is there subsidies or funding for projects from the DFT, something from central government to get this going?
That's a good question. I think there are certainly subsidies in some areas, directly or indirectly from the DFT. I know in some of the markets we are sort of looking at subsidies and things like that, because I think generally speaking it's a commercial operation. And obviously, there's a lot of upfront investment for Voy, but Voy is a profit-making company in that sense. But I think there are definitely some sort of discussions of subsidies in other markets, but I don't think at the moment in the UK. But the DFT is not directly subsidising the trials.
Have a question about, do I need a driver's license with a photo to sign up to scooter use? And I can put my hand up already and say, I have yet to be able to try the scooters because I don't have a valid British driving license. So it's something I've had to go and resolve so I can use the scooters. So can you elaborate on that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question. But we did essentially, as part of the trial, the DFT has said to ride any scooter in the trial, whether it's a Voy or another one in another city, you need to be 18 years old and you need a provisional or a full driving license. And then we have a process whereby when you sign up with your account and then you register your driving license, it will ask you to take a selfie. And then we verify that you are the person that's using it. So that's a measure we have to deter sort of underage use and things like that.
So we have a question from Cass. Have you looked at better ways for people to carry shopping on scooters, or I guess carry anything on the scooter? Or is there something about the dynamics of the balance of the scooter that means that wouldn't be possible?
It's a good question. So we have a little sort of a baggage hook on the stem, I guess, if you think about it like a bike, just below the handlebar. So that you can carry sort of lighter bags and items. I mean, personally, obviously, I travel to the cities I work with quite regularly and use Voys, and I normally have a rucksack with me, and that tends to be fine. In terms of sort of balancing, I mean, you're much more upright than on a sort of like a road bike. So actually, I find it easier to sort of ride with a rucksack than on my road bike in terms of balance, and also they're very sturdy. There's about 28 kilos, so the scooters themselves, so they're pretty heavy. Which does help with sort of, you don't feel like you're getting blown about by the wind. And the e-bikes, we have a basket on the front as well, so you can put, similar to the Santander cycles in London, so you can put things in the front there as well.
Okay. Oh, wow, these questions are suddenly coming in thick and fast, so we might start doing some power answers here. They come out of nowhere sometimes. So Anthony saw 2 scooter riders on the pavement. They could have caused a serious accident to someone coming out of the store. How are they able to ride there if you have restrictions on pavement use? So perhaps you could elaborate on how that geofencing for pavement use is applied.
It's a really good question. Pavement riding is obviously one of our big areas of sort of that we focus on. It's obviously completely illegal against the user terms and conditions, and we take action with any users that are reported doing it. Obviously, that said, we take lots and lots of measures, but we can't stop every instance. In terms of the geofencing, the geofencing is accurate to a sort of great extent, but managing whether someone is on a pavement or a road is really very tricky with the current GPS technology. So GPS tends to work better when you're parked, because obviously every time a GPS has a sort of ping rate. It doesn't really matter if you're stationary because your signal is not moving. When you're moving, it's quite a bit harder, and obviously you need a very rapid ping rate and very accurate GPS to manage that. And also, anyone that's used their phone to go for a run or something like that, the GPS signal can sometimes end up all over the place if you're between tall buildings. So GPS to manage pavement riding is quite tricky. And that's not something we do at the moment, because the risk you run with that is if you were to sort of block off an area which was the pavement as a no ride zone, you might risk a sort of problem with the GPS signal that might enable someone to sort of cut out on the road. So we don't do that at the moment. One thing we do in terms of pavement riding, we are running a trial in Northampton at the moment with a company called Luna, who are trialing a sort of pavement detection system using computer vision. So essentially to recognise what's in front of the scooter using a camera. So it is something we're looking at, and it's obviously a key issue for us. So yeah, that's the sort of position on pavement riding.
So likewise with the geofencing, is that used anywhere in Cambridge to adjust the speed of the scooter in certain areas?
Yes, exactly. So for example, a good example is Parker's Piece. So central Cambridge, if you ride through the park there, through the middle on the cycle path, you will be slowed to 5 miles an hour because it's a slow speed zone. And I've personally have used that and tried it, and it works. So that's an example. We have other zones like that where we have a slow speed zone, so you'll be limited to 5 miles an hour. And obviously we also have no ride zones. So for example, the shopping centre will be blocked off as a no riding zone. And if you go to there at sort of full power on your scooter, it will simply just cut out and slowly bring you to a halt.
I have actually witnessed that, people with their scooters in the Grafton area trying to get them going, and maybe they couldn't use them, but I thought it was because it was locked in that area. That it
could have been outside of the operating area, I guess, if it was up there.
Not sure. Okay, so overall, does Voy have a position on that deregulation of scooters? Is that a public position that the organisation takes to say, yes, we support everyone being able to own their scooters? Is that a position you'd be able to state?
It's a good question. I think obviously it is a big question for us, and as a sort of rental e-scooter operator, I have colleagues in our sort of policy team, public policy team, who work very closely with the DFT, and I know it's something that the DFT are obviously working on frantically to work out what the sort of future should be. I don't think as a company we have a sort of overall position one way or the other, but I think what we would say is that the data that we will have gained at the end of these trials in the UK, the sort of rental service, will hopefully be really, really rich. And to be honest, it's not just Voy. There are other operators operating in the trials in the UK. All of that data that we pull in different cities, and cities of different sizes, will, I'm sure, inform future legislation. And I would hope that a lot of the measures that I've talked about today in terms of sort of safety and technology and controlling where scooters can and can't go and the speeds that they can travel at, all of these hopefully will be learnings that are applied to the future legislation to ensure that they can be adopted safely, and become part of the sort of wider transport ecosystem.
Charles asked about whether you have weather data, and I can also say that in the stakeholder meetings that I attend, where we look at the stats on the usage of the e-scooters and the e-bikes, that we do get a little chart showing us the weather to see if that's influenced. But is there any further analysis that you do to correlate usage to weather patterns?
We do monitor it. I think we have, as I say, we have a huge amount of data that we monitor. I think I'm probably correct to say that we don't exactly look at the sort of how the weather directly affects things, because there are a number of different factors that affect utilization. Obviously, we know if we have a particular few days of really good weather, we know the effect that has on utilization, which is normally really positive. I don't think we look at sort of overall weather trends, but I'm sure it's something that we would do. One thing that we can do at the moment is if we know that there is really bad weather approaching, so for example in the winter, if it's going to snow, we can actually remotely sleep the fleet of scooters in different areas so that people can't use them. And if we think, for example, really, really heavy rain and sort of risk of flooding, we can effectively switch the scooters off in advance.
I guess you could use that switch off feature for other situations. I think I've heard if there are big festivals or things like that where perhaps it's not suitable for the scooters to be in use, you can switch them off.
Exactly that. Yeah, we do that as well.
Yeah. So questions about parking and scooters. I'm sure you were expecting this one. And Anthony asks about or raises that RNIB has highlighted many concerns and has pointed out that locally the parking bays for scooters in his area, they're not marked out. And that seems to be that there are no markings or obviously specific bays for scooters anywhere in Cambridge. So they often look like they're dumped there. The RNIB policy states that there must be requirements for the safe parking of e-scooters, and we believe that the safest and most effective parking scheme will be for them to be parked in specified bays on the road. So in particularly in cities with very constrained pavement space like Cambridge, how do we ensure that scooters aren't becoming hazards and blockages for people who have visual impairments or accessibility issues using our pavements?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that one we come across a lot. Obviously, parking clutter is a big issue for, I think, all sort of micromobility operators. In Cambridge, it's correct to say we don't have any physical infrastructure at the moment. Obviously, you know, we've launched quite quickly in the UK, and we just haven't sort of worked with the council to install that yet. But obviously, it's not a case where we have no methods for sort of controlling the way people park. So anyone that does park in Cambridge, even though there's no physical infrastructure, they are limited by the geofencing. So they have to park when they end their ride in the app. It will say either you are in a mandatory parking zone, which is indicated on the map itself, or you're not. And if you're not, you can't end your ride. So you can't actually leave the scooter in that place. So that's the sort of main measure that we have to ensure people park in an orderly fashion. We also monitor very closely the kind of the demand around different hubs, and we do a lot of what we call rebalancing, so moving scooters around if there are areas of very high demand. So for example, around the station, it tends to be quite popular, lots of people parking around there. So we have people that throughout our operating hours and also afterwards actually move the scooters around. In terms of the sort of equalities groups and particularly the RNIB, that's a really good one as well. I personally run a monthly meeting with local equalities groups in Cambridge, including actually a representative from the RNIB, and we keep them informed of the sort of our latest developments. But we sort of go a bit beyond that in the sense that we actually work, I think, quite closely with the RNIB in our design of parking racks. So the last few months we've been rolling out parking racks in the Solent region and in other places, and we've actually taken feedback from the RNIB in terms of how best to do those. So the image I showed before of the sort of simple rack, we're actually going to be adding detachable side plates with hazard marking and sort of more visible markings for the rack itself. The side plates are there to stop people from colliding with the scooters when they're parked up. So just reducing that hazard for different groups. I think what's interesting is that in different cities, we've sort of had different approaches, and it depends on the sort of approach of the local authority. So in Solent, you know, we've had lots of racks installed right at the outset of the operation to manage parking clutter. In Cambridge, you know, Bristol, Liverpool, we started off without parking infrastructure, although it's something we're looking at the moment and we'll be rolling it out. And in Oxford, for example, we've installed painted parking bays as opposed to parking racks. So it really just depends on the sort of individual city's demand. I mean, what I can say is that in Cambridge, we've been operating since October. You know, we've increased the fleet size quite a bit since we began, and also increased the operating area. And generally, it's been pretty good. But we have a suite of measures that we can use to manage those kind of issues.
Okay. I've got questions about how are you promoting the scooters, the e-bikes, because the questioner hasn't really seen much information out in the public about them, and also the pricing strategy. It seems that the prices are comparable to using the bus. Is that intentional? I'd be interested to know also from people in the comments about the pricing. How do you feel that stacks up compared to, say, owning your own scooter, your own bike? But John, promotion and pricing.
Super. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of promotion, I think we do a reasonable amount of promotion. We do obviously sort of social media advertising and actual sort of physical marketing as well, as digital marketing. We have a website which we promote quite heavily. but I think generally it's one of those things. It's also word of mouth. So obviously, we have a visible and physical presence in the cities. That is obviously one way of of spreading the word, and our scooters are very visible. And the local authorities in our cities will publish the information on their website in terms of how to get about. I think one of the things that's probably slightly limited us recently has been the lockdown restrictions. So obviously we've had limitations on what we can and can't advertise, particularly the last few months. Obviously we've not been promoting non-essential journeys due to the restrictions. So you will probably see more marketing content over the next few months as we're allowed to actually encourage people to get about for reasons other than essential journeys. But I think that's probably been the limiting factor so far. The second question was on pricing. So I think it's a good question. We have similar pricing across all of our markets. Actually, there tends to be relatively limited variation. They're benchmarked on a number of different things. Generally, the price of micromobility in other markets and in Europe as well. But also, we do work closely with the city authorities to say, is this going to interfere with your existing, let's call it, your existing mobility scheme or your bus operators. And so in some cases we have different pricing for the monthly and weekly passes, monthly and daily passes even, depending on the price of other options. Because what we don't want to do is tread on the toes of existing more sustainable modes of transport, such as buses.
I guess really what we should be thinking about is how does the price compare to driving? And ideally, it is more cost effective to change from driving to shared mobility, but buses and walking and cycling relatively steady. A question coming back, and I'm sorry, normally I try and put these questions in more order, but tonight we're just going through them in the order they come through. So the next question goes back to this contract with the local authority, and just does that set out any KPIs, in particular the expectation for modal shift? So do you need to actually achieve X number of journeys that should have been done by car or would have been done by car?
That's a really good question. I think what I can say is that obviously it differs by market, but I've read through some of our contractual agreements with different cities, and some of them can run to hundreds of pages. So I don't know. I couldn't say, and it also might be relatively sensitive. I don't know whether I could say we've committed to any modal shift data. But what I will say is that the councils are really interested in it, as is the DfT. It's a regular conversation, and everyone wants to know. That part of the reason of this trial is everyone wants to know why people might use micromobility, and if they are, what sort of trips they're replacing and why, and how we can enable that and get people out of cars. So I think whether or not we've committed to it, I don't know, but it is certainly something that we're focusing on, and is a goal for us as a company to enable modal shift.
Yeah. So I think particularly, I know for myself, we've had a few shared mobility providers in the past, and they come and then they go and they leave their bikes behind. And how can we trust that Voice got that sustainability to stick around? I know personally, after traveling different places in the UK, I ended up with about 5 or 6 different shared bike apps in my phone, and I think I lost money when they all shut down. So how sustainable is Voi for the long term?
That's a very good question. I guess it's kind of an existential question for Voi. I think one of the things about micromobility is that, because of the possibly some of the previous examples of, let's say the shared bike operators a couple of years ago, obviously there have been a lot of lessons that have been taken from how they operate, and I think, or how they operated, and I think one of the things that we do as a company is we work very closely with cities, and we realise that any kind of mobility operation in a city is a symbiotic relationship. It's not a one-way street, and actually we have to work really closely with the cities. So I think in doing that, and in this way that we scale and the way that we manage the operation, and we have all of these different measures to manage the issues that arise and the challenges, that hopefully gives us a sustainability. And I showed the testimonials right at the beginning. I think generally we've had really great feedback from our cities so far. And I think what we show by all the sort of development that we do in terms of the product and the service and the measures we have to manage our operations, we can demonstrate that we are sustainable for the long term and that we are, a long-term city partner. We're in 50 cities across Europe at the moment. I think it's not something that's going to disappear, but obviously never say never, and we don't know what the future holds. But I think generally people can have confidence that we will hopefully be here to stay.
So on sustainability, how does Voy ensure sustainability, particularly around the use of batteries? How long does a scooter last? How long does the battery for scooter last? How do you ensure those materials are reused, recycled, etc.?
Yeah, very good question. And again, it's sort of one that comes up a lot. So we actually did a sort of what's called a life cycle analysis, which was conducted by Ernst & Young, I think last year. And that essentially analysed our scooters and the way that we operate them. We're currently, as I say, on our sort of V3X. I think our sort of third, or I think it might be our fourth generation scooter after the V3 itself. And then we've got the V4 coming as well. In that time, obviously, the product has developed a huge amount, and we've got a number of measures to ensure that they have longevity. That report from Ernst & Young indicated that the lifespan will be up to 5 years, and over the sort of, I think since January 2019, we've actually reduced our emissions by 71%. So there are a number of different things we can do. In terms of batteries, I don't know exactly what we do with batteries, but I do know that all of our shipping of e-scooters is done by train from the Far East, where they're manufactured, and we operate a service that is fully carbon neutral. So a couple of things we do in cities: we use e-vans, we use e-bikes, cargo bikes, to move our scooters around. We use renewable energy where it's all possible to fuel our operations. And yeah, I think we're constantly improving how we do things, but generally speaking, the scooters should last for up to 5 years. And obviously we're improving that with each generation.
Do you have any statistics on the average distance travelled for each rental? And actually, I'd just say generally statistics, if possible, for Cambridge. How often is each scooter hired per day or per week? How far does it travel? How many users are there? I see some of those statistics. So if you don't have them all to hand, John, Nigel, who asked that question, I will ask if I can get that from the next stakeholder meeting and I can share that. But John, what stats do you have about the details of usage?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends sort of on the market, but in terms of Cambridge, we generally see. I'm just having a look. I think since we launched, we've seen, I think, roughly around 75,000 rides. So it's between 70 and 75,000 rides. So it's been quite it was quite slow during the lockdown period in the sort of over the winter months. Utilization wasn't that high, but since then it's really increased, and I think we've got between 10 and 15,000 users now, probably closer to 15,000. In terms of distance travel, I think we're between 150 and 200,000 from memory, in terms of kilometers, which is around the distance of sort of about 4 times around the equator. And in terms of fleet size, we also increased that quite a bit. So we're over 300 scooters now in Cambridge. So I think in terms of the average ride time, I think is generally about sort of 15-16 minutes. But again, it depends on the sort of period and the market. Some markets it's a bit longer. Some markets it's a bit less. I can't talk in detail to the sort of number of rides per scooter per day, although that is obviously an important metric. But I think generally we aim to sort of hit, somewhere between sort of 2 and 5 is a really good number in each of our markets. But we obviously monitor that quite closely. So yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of context. I can't go into too much detail on the sort of day-to-day utilization, but yeah, it's been a real success so far in Cambridge, and we hope that will increase quite a bit in the coming months.
And I will see what follow-up report we can get from that stakeholder group, and perhaps we'll have something we can put in the Camcycle magazine. So we'll follow up on that and see what we can get. Adding to the question about data, is there any commitment from Voy about publishing open data about usage rates and so on, or is that commercially sensitive?
Good question. I think we can talk to sort of high level data for usage in the UK. Obviously, as you say, Roxanne, in terms of specific sort of markets and time periods, that is probably a bit commercially sensitive. So we have to be relatively careful about what we can share. But yes, I think in general terms, in sort of the UK, we're happy to sort of discuss those figures and demonstrate that the usage has been really good. I think generally speaking as well, what we expect is, having had a few months of sort of lockdown restrictions this summer, as we increase the fleet sizes, the utilisation should really increase quite significantly.
We've had some questions about your users. So Simon asks you, what do your users tell you about the way drivers treat them on the roads? Or do you have any information about that user experience, particularly as a result of drivers or the state of the roads? We also have a question about, do you have any information about user profile? So what's the typical age of a Voy e-scooter or e-bike user?
Good. Yeah, okay. So in terms of feedback from users, so we have a user support team who take any sort of feedback that comes in through the app or is reported to us in terms of users. Obviously, some of that data is really good and people can provide really clear data. Sometimes it's sort of less so, and we get sort of one-word descriptions, which is a bit harder. But I think generally the sort of trends that we see are kind of similar to cycling, really, in the sense that physical infrastructure to such as cycle lanes and sort of segregated cycle lanes make people feel safer. We use, obviously, we only really allow people to go on roads that have a speed limit of 30 miles an hour or less, which sort of limits that from a sort of safety perspective, people going on very fast roads. And we've had really positive feedback the last few weeks with the V4 scooter, which has the turning indicators, which means that it's just a bit easier to indicate and turn. And I think from a sort of reporting behaviour perspective, we've also got the license plates now, which make it easier to report anyone that's misusing them. So that would be in terms of sort of user feedback. Sorry, the second question.
Do you have a sense of or data on the typical age?
That was it, yeah, the demographics. So I think in terms of demographics, we don't have concrete data that we can share at this moment, although we are sort of working on it because we're trying to get a view of each of our different trials. Lots of them are in different stages. But I think generally speaking, our users tend to be younger. They tend to be sort of 20s and 30s is the vast majority. And in terms of demographics, we're also looking at that at the moment, but I don't think we have a concrete view. But that is something that we're looking to publish later this year, because we've done a couple of surveys already, and we do biannual user surveys of all of our users, which go out via email to say, who are you, what kind of age range do you fall in, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things we are doing is looking at how we can increase that accessibility to different groups. So we have the discount schemes, and obviously we're very conscious that lots of our users are younger, as tends to be the case with sort of new technology, things like that. But we're looking at ways that we can increase accessibility for different groups. So watch this space. Later this year, we will have data that we can share, but at the moment, we don't have anything particularly concrete.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is the last question, John. You've done very well. It's been quite the interrogation, but we did warn you that from the very beginning that there would be lots of questions. Although I will admit, I'm surprised we haven't had more questions about the hardware of the actual scooters, but that's okay. This is a little bit about the hardware of the scooters. Do you have, well, firstly, how stable are the scooters when the user encounters a pothole or a speed bump? Will they tip forward? But then also, do you have any accelerometer data that detects accidents which happen while the scooters are being ridden? So that safety issue of the condition of the roads and the technology in the scooter, what are you learning and how do we keep people safe?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I think what I would say is the scooters that we have at the moment are sort of quite different in terms of the product to previous generations, to when we started out right at the beginning. And we've had a lot of input into the design standards and the sort of how they're designed. I think one of the interesting things looking at I was looking at our products sort of insights earlier in terms of how the generations have differed, and actually our scooters now are much heavier than they were right at the beginning. So they're now about sort of 28 kilos, and they're just a lot more sturdy than the sort of very first generation of micromobility in Europe. And obviously we've done a lot of work in terms of user feedback over the last couple of years in terms of wheel size, suspension, having different types of tires, that kind of thing. And so I think they are generally, I've ridden V3Xs and V4s in Portsmouth, and to be honest, I've had absolutely no issues, and they feel very safe. Obviously I am a cyclist normally, so I'm probably more adept at sort of riding things like that than some people through experience, but generally speaking, I think yeah, they feel pretty sturdy. Obviously the roads, any cyclist will know that the roads of the UK are not the best at times, so that is a challenge. All of our scooters, when we bring out a new generation, do go through safety tests with things like potholes and ramps and curbs and stuff like that before they are released, so there's a lot of thought that goes into that. But I think generally, yeah, they feel pretty safe, and the same goes for the e-bikes, which are a bit more traditional.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's it for questions. I'll tie up with a summary of some comments. So we've had lots of comments about the parking of scooters and people finding them to be a bit of a nuisance or a danger in some places. And I'm sure you've definitely heard that before, but I feel like I must note it. We've had a few comments about that. We've also had some requests about, can your geofencing technology be installed in cars and or children to keep them under control? So does Voy have any plans of expanding into installing geofencing in people's children?
Not I have to say, not that I'm aware of. I'd be very surprised if we did. But I think on a serious note, I think it is a good point that, and the point I make about the trials is that there's lots of technological developments that we've introduced as an operator to manage, how rental e-scooters operate and how they can be controlled, that I think are definitely lessons that can be applied to other technologies as well and other sort of forms of transport. So I think hopefully, whatever happens with the future of e-scooters in the UK, that we will take the lessons from the trials this year.
Excellent. Well, John, on behalf of our many members, I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you for your patience while we had a bit of a nightmarish start, and thank you for answering all of our questions. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, thank you for letting me take the time to speak to everyone and for all the questions. Thank you very much.
Well, I'll let you slip away now, John, and if everyone else would like to stick around, I'll do the quick wrap up of what's been happening in campaigning recently. But thank you, John.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Okay, let me switch on my slides. Okay, I think this screen is sharing. Yes. Right, firstly, a quick reminder to everybody that the elections are coming up here on Thursday. So if you have not already submitted a postal vote, please make sure you make arrangements to vote on Thursday. And you can find out about what our local candidates have to say at the Camcycle election survey. So if you visit camcycle.org.uk/elections, you will see the largest ever election survey completed by Camcycle, conducted by Camcycle. It's a mammoth. So there were 433 candidates across 5 elections. And we've endeavoured to contact each and every one of them. And I think we reached well over 400, or we had some form of email address for over 400 of them and sent them the survey. So you've got the combined authority, the mayoral candidates. When I last checked, only one had responded. So it's not too late to ask those candidates if they will also share their views. The Police and Crime Commissioner candidates, we have 3 candidates have responded. So that's the Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative candidates. You can read their responses. We've got the County Council, the City Council candidates and the South Cambs District Council. So please do take a look at those surveys. And also, if you missed it last month, our mayoral hustings are available on YouTube. So you can see what the mayoral candidates, Nick Johnson and Aidan van der Weyer, had to say. James Palmer did not join us, but you can learn more. Oh, excellent. I have had an update that we do now also have a response from the Lib Dem mayoral candidate on the combined authority survey. So that's excellent. Please do take a look at what they've had to say. And a huge thank you to everybody who's helped us develop the election survey. We've worked with campaigners and campaigning groups across the whole region, so we could cover the entire county. And I think it was a remarkable job to get those questions. And I've been really impressed at how far out we've had a response. So I think some of us weren't sure if we would get those answers, but we did. So it's absolutely been worth the effort to help other communities get some insight into what their candidates think about cycling. Some other fantastic news, and another reason to say a great big thank you to our supporters. Over the last month, we ran the Big Give Zero Carbon Streets fundraising campaign. We had match funding, a pot of £5,000, and we were able to use up all of that pot, and thanks to your generous donations we raised over £10,000. So thank you so much. This means we're getting to halfway of our big target to raise enough funds so that we can hire an additional staff member to help local communities, local groups to develop their visions and to campaign for zero carbon streets in their communities. So an amazing response. We're absolutely over the moon. And again, to see that regional support, we know that we can't always help everybody that we want to, but to see that engagement and support with this campaign, there's clearly a desire to have more impact in more communities. So thank you so much. We're one step closer to making that happen. Other fantastic news, I was meant to be having a holiday on Friday, but we were given not very much notice that the jetty connecting the Ditton Meadows and Stourbridge Common was going to be reopened at last. So thank you to our correspondent, Simon Nuttall, who was there live on the ground and could let us know that this was coming. The GCP confirmed that, and we raced on down and were witness to a moment of history when the railings were removed and we were allowed to once again get to the other side of, I guess, the bridge. So if you haven't checked it out, do head on down. It's a significant improvement to what we had there before. It means we can start to think about the Reach ride for next year and know that we won't have to do any diversions there. And it's just another step closer to the completion of this section of the Chisholm Trail. So it took a lot longer than anyone hoped or expected, but it's here at last. So thank you to the GCP for delivering this. Thank you to all of our members who have been keeping a very keen eye on progress. And hooray, we can cycle along the river again. So well done. Also great news. Unfortunately, I've not checked this one out yet, but we've heard that the Coton path has been reopened. Something that should have taken 6 weeks, it ended up taking 6 months, so longer than expected, but from what I've heard, it's a significant improvement. So once again, what a big day on Friday. 2 pieces of infrastructure opened by the GCP. Let's hope future cycling infrastructure comes along a little bit quicker. Interestingly, we were talking about what people got up to on the bank holiday weekend if they weren't able to go on the Reach ride, and lots of people have been talking about how they've been going for walks. So we love walking here as well. We're not just about cycling, and this month is Walk This May, promoted by Living Streets. So perhaps we are not swapping our driving for our walking, but maybe we can encourage others to do so by our behaviour and by promoting Walk This May. So I shall do that because I've been doing lots of walking during the pandemic. And just another little nudge on cycle theft. There is a group now of Camcycle members who catch up every few weeks to progress our work on cycle theft, our campaigning on cycle theft. I have regular meetings with numerous stakeholders about cycle theft. I'll spend a lot of time on this issue, but this meeting is a really good way for our members to work together, to share their insights, to share their questions with me, and I can feedback what's coming in from the stakeholder group as well. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, do get in touch, email contact@camcycle.org.uk and we'll get you involved. And we've got some exciting projects coming up. We've been working on a big campaign about keeping your cycle safe. We're working on updating the Camcycle cycle parking guide. So this is a group that's making stuff happen. Do get involved if you would like. Now I'm just checking the comments for any new updates. So news from Andrew, the West Cambridge footpath and cycle path over the M11 to Coton has reopened. Oh, that's the news I've shared. And then from Sam, the County Council has responded to her tweet that works at Robin Hood Junction won't now be completed until the end of June. So just as I was saying, wouldn't it be nice if cycling infrastructure could come along a bit quicker? We have another delay. We'll keep an eye on that one. I think that's it for me, for Camcycle. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting us. And I hope that now the weather's improving, that lockdown is loosened, that you're having a great time out there on your bike. Happy cycling, everyone. Bye.